Welcome to the Daily Dawg podcast. Today is Saturday, November 8th, and this is week 11 of the 2025 college football season, or Georgia's 2025 college football season. This is going to be game 9 for the Georgia Bulldogs. So Georgia is 7-1, 5-1 in the conference right now with 2 conference games remaining, and this is one of those 2 conference games. So we have this game and the Texas game, and that'll wrap up our conference schedule. Once will give us a little bit of a chance to look ahead and talk about what the scenarios are for Georgia competing in the SEC championship game and playing for the SEC championship again this year for back-to-back seasons. But first and foremost, we're going to get into a few more things just about Mississippi State and about the game today. The game is at noon Eastern time, which is 11 a.m. Central time, which is where Stark Vegas or Mississippi State is in the country. I guess, they're in the central time zone. So for them, this is an 11 a.m. kickoff. For us, our team traveling over there, I guess they'll think of this as a noon game. So far, the noon games haven't been much of a bother. Sometimes people think about those as big trap games or games to worry about. And definitely the national media, a lot of different people I watch and follow sometimes, like Josh Pate and his college football show, and other people that I've heard from. Other people have talked about, I think Jordan Rogers on the SEC Network has mentioned. A couple of people have shared some concern. I mean, not concern because they're invested in Georgia football, but concern looking, like who might be in trouble or who could be in a situation that's surprising. Several people have pointed to this game as a game that could be trouble for a top-ranked team out there. So Georgia, number 5, going on the road to face the Mississippi State Bulldogs. Mississippi State does have some momentum. They just won their first conference game in over 2 seasons. Last year, they were winless in the conference, and this year they've This year, they picked up their first win in the conference against Arkansas. So they're definitely a little bit excited, a little bit motivated. So that could either have them riding a high wave of a momentum that they carry forward and continue to try to make a name for themselves in the conference. Sometimes you see that once a team gets a win like that, gets over the hump, then all of a sudden wins seem to come. Or it could be the classic trap scenario even for them. And you say, how could it be a trap game when you have the number 5 team in the country coming to your place? Well, could be a little bit of a letdown, having finally won that conference game, got that monkey off their back. They are 5-4 on the season, and their next win would put them at what we typically think of as bowl eligibility. That bowl eligibility line's been a little fuzzy over the last many years because there's so many bowl games now. Sometimes bowl games have to consider taking teams with losing records. But first and foremost, you still want to get to 6 games if you want to be in a bowl game. And, that's a reasonable goal for Mississippi State, is to get to a bowl game. So they've got a chance to make themselves bowl eligible to win, pick up a second conference win. And they've been tough at home. Their last home game, or one of their last home games, involved having Texas. They were at Arkansas last week for that win, so they got that SEC win on the road. Their last home game was against Texas, and they had Texas dead to rights. They were leading by 2 or 3 scores. I forget the exact score. I think it was like 38-21 or something. And they allowed Texas a radical comeback, got into overtime, and the overtime wasn't even close. They looked hapless in the overtime. They couldn't even get off a forward positive yardage play in the overtime. Texas scored the touchdown with ease. State had won the toss, so they got to go second, but they went backwards, and their quarterback Brent Chapin ended up being tackled almost near midfield, scrambling and running for his life, or throwing the ball away somewhere near midfield. So that's how the game ended last week. The last game at home for them. That was against Texas. That was very disappointing because, again, they had dominated that game throughout. Looked like Texas was going to go down. It was listed as a stirring comeback for Texas, and Texas did do some things right. I mean, you can't come back and win a game without some effort, but I watched as one of those people in the country who saw the upset brewing, flipped over to that game, put it on, and I watched the final 5 or 10 minutes of regulation and then the overtime, and State really coughed that game away. I mean, all they had to do was get a first down or 2 here or there. Texas, one of the ways Texas was able to score was on a punt return. So State couldn't get enough first downs, try to run out the clock a little bit, put another score up to put too much distance in. They end up punting, and on the punt, they give up the dreaded 70-something yard punt return for a touchdown. And, next thing you know, Texas is right in this thing and getting it to overtime. So But overall, again, State on the season 4-5, and so that's our first thing. Who is Mississippi State? So Mississippi State's led by Jeff Lebby as their head coach. This is his second year. They went 2-10 last year, and like I said, they're 5-4 this year, and just the one conference win so far. But they, again, have a chance to close out their season strong. They always finish against their hated in-state rivals, the Egg Bowl, a really nasty little rivalry that doesn't get a lot of national attention. But I have some family connections to Mississippi, and so that I've married into. So over the years, I've come to learn a bit about this Egg Bowl rivalry, and it's in the state of Mississippi. It's a big deal. So they'll have that game, and of course, Ole Miss is very good and already largely locked up a playoff spot. And I say largely, nothing's for certain yet, and there's a lot to work out. But Ole Miss is nicely in the playoff rankings, up in the sixth position, and they are sitting there with just the one loss. So, most of the metrics and things say that they could lose one game and still make the playoff if they make it to 10-2. And Ole Miss is still in contention, just like Georgia is, by the way, with only one loss in the conference. They are still in contention for the SEC championship game. If we have time, we might get to that, although I want to keep this one short. It's already Saturday morning, and this game is coming on early today, so I want to give you a chance to hear this podcast, hear what we say about predicting this game, and then we can come back and talk about SEC scenarios and playoff scenarios later. So Jeff Lebby, who is Jeff Lebby? Jeff Lebby has been an offensive coordinator tied to, or he kind of comes out of the Art Briles. And in fact, Art Briles from Baylor, if you're familiar with him, was a guy who turned Baylor from nothing into something, and but then had some scandal. And scandal was that there was sexual assault charges against some of the football players, and an allegation that the university and the football program knew about these allegations, and they kind of swept them under the rug. And this got Art Briles fired, kind of made the Briles coaching tree a little bit of a negative. Lebby defended Art Briles, and he has good reason to, because Art Briles, by the way, is his father-in-law. So put a little taint on Jeff Lebby's career, but Jeff Lebby is a guy who was good enough to play college football at Oklahoma. He was recruited to Oklahoma but had an injury, never got to play. He became friends with Josh Heupel, who was famously a national championship winning quarterback at Oklahoma, and of course now is the coach at Tennessee. And so he coached some with Heupel, he coached some at UCF, and then Lane Kiffin actually hired him to be a passing game offensive coordinator, and he was at Ole Miss for a while, and then he was at Oklahoma also as an offensive coordinator and quarterback coach, and then he got hired from Oklahoma, where he had done a really good job. His offenses were quite good, and so most every place he's been, his offenses have been good. Lane Kiffin had him on his staff, Josh Heupel had him on his staff as an offensive assistant, offensive coordinator, quarterback coach. Some guys like Mackenzie Milton, who got a lot of press as a potential Heisman candidate when he was at UCF. Dylan Gabriel, who started at UCF but ended his career at Oregon and helped get Oregon into playoff contention a couple of years ago. Dylan Gabriel, these are a couple quarterbacks he's worked with, and so he's got a strong record with quarterbacks. And he's got a good offense this year at Mississippi State, and that's part of what makes them dangerous. So he was hired last year, was his first year as head coach at Mississippi State. We don't have a lot of head-to-head. Of course, Georgia played Mississippi State last year, and you might remember that game. That was one game that I went to and was in the stands at Sanford Stadium, and it was a frustrating game. Georgia kept kind of pulling up by 17, 18 points, and then State would early in the game, it looked like the defense would kind of keep State shut down, but then sort of mid-second quarter or so, all of a sudden State starts moving the ball and getting some long plays, and they get a touchdown or two. And in the end, I think this game score was 41-31, and it was just one of those games that was a little bit frustrating because it felt like we should have won that one more convincingly. We could never quite put away. So we've already seen this State team under this coach come to Athens against last year's defense and be able to put up quite a bit of yards and quite a bit of points. So this is something certainly we're going to be concerned about. So Jeff Lebby is a guy who's had a good record, and his career might even have been slowed down. I mean, he's a young guy. He's not very old. He's only 41. So I mean, to be a head coach at an SEC school at 41, he's actually come along pretty well. But his record might have been a little tainted because there was definitely some scandal from that Art Briles connection and the Baylor connection. And again, Art Briles is his father-in-law, so he kind of defended Briles, and that was not a popular choice. Of course, at the time those allegations came out was right in the beginning of that, or during the whole height of the Me Too era, which is not to say that we've stopped listening when women complain. And again, these things should be taken seriously. It does look like Baylor did a bad job with it. It was probably reasonable. I mean, I don't really want to get into judging all that. I honestly don't have that much information or remember that much about what happened. I'm just trying to say that, look, we definitely want to take seriously when there's allegations of misconduct, and it did seem like Baylor didn't take these seriously, and the Baylor coaching staff and the Baylor program for a little bit of time paid the price for that. And Jeff Lebby was associated with that. But these days, nobody's really talking about that. He has been hired back. He was at UCF, then Ole Miss, then Oklahoma, and now a head coach at Mississippi State. So, Mississippi State seems to be on the rise, I guess you would say. Again, they suffered through a 2-10 season last year, but a year in which they played a lot of teams tough, including Georgia. This year, they played a lot of teams tough again, including Texas, including Florida. They also, one of the ways they've actually got a positive record is they had an out-of-conference game this year against Arizona State. And Arizona State, as you might remember, was last year's Big 12 championship and honestly gave Texas in the college football playoff last year everything that they wanted. I mean, except for a couple bad breaks, Arizona State easily could have won that game. Texas ended up winning at 38-31. So they were very competitive. Also, I just want to say Mississippi State, before I forget this, Mississippi State does have an entrant on what I like to get, and sometimes maybe when we have some time, we might go through some fun things I like to point out, like the all-name team. A lot of people find these things funny. So the leading running back in terms of yardage and yards per carry on Mississippi State's team is a guy by the name of Fluff Blothwell. So if that doesn't make right up at the top of the all-name team out there, I don't know who does. Fluff Blothwell. So I'm going to enjoy this game just because they're going to say, and there goes Fluff Blothwell. Hopefully he goes right into the line and is stuffed for no gain, as Georgia run defense does what it has done well all season, which is stopping the run. So, but Fluff Bothwell, you'll hear his name. He's not just a random player. He is one of their key players, and he's definitely a member of the all-name team out there, certainly in the SEC. So, okay, so that's who Jeff Lebby is. Again, we don't have a ton of record to compare Kirby to, and I want to keep this short, so we're not going to go deep into this. Usually when we break down and we get to this final podcast before the ball game each week, this is our predictions podcast, and we have kind of a methodology for breaking down the games and looking at it. So we analyze the team, the coaches, what we know about them, what we've learned about them from the season, what we know about this coach, especially if they've got a history against Kirby and the Bulldogs, or even Kirby when he was at Alabama, and for instance, they were offensive coordinator. I think we can keep this one pretty light. Again, that's where Lebby comes from. He's really kind of connected or very similar, almost like an extension of the Josh Heupel offense. Josh Heupel has sort of adopted the Baylor offense in his own version. And so Jeff Lebby is a little bit of a disciple from that, coached under Heupel, and now he is an offensive coordinator, a head coach now after being an offensive coordinator, but he's his own head coach now here at Mississippi State, and his offense is similar. They would like to run the ball, and they actually have two running backs who have over 400 yards per game, and we don't. Right now, Chauncey Bowens has over 400 yards a game, but Nate Frazier is just under that. So they have two guys, Devon Booth and Fluff Bothwell, who have put in 490 and 475 yards. So you would say, wow, they're running the ball pretty well. They haven't committed to the run as much as Georgia. They're only averaging about 159, a little less than 160 yards a game rushing. Georgia more like 180. So And overall, offensively, as much as Lebby is an offensive coach, and you think of Tennessee, and I say that he's kind of connected to the Art Briles coaching tree, which also Josh Heupel is sort of in that group and augmented the Baylor offense from years ago that kind of was famous for its sort of spread, fast-paced offense. Well, Lebby is part of that. So they do run a fast-paced offense. They are not big on time of possession, a little bit like Tennessee. So that's a little bit of a weakness for them. Even though they do tend to put up yards and points, they don't hold the ball. So they are giving their opponents a lot of times to match and answer. And we talked about that in detail as being a potential weakness of a team that, yes, can put up some points, but can let the other team, if you're playing a team that also has a good offense. And so again, going back to the Georgia-Tennessee game, look, Tennessee is still averaging more points and more yards per game. They're averaging almost 500 yards or over 500 yards a game. They're right up in the top 10 in points and yards per game so far this season. But when Georgia and Tennessee played, and Georgia's got a good offense. Again, Georgia is a top third offense in FCS, right? No, yeah, FBS. Gosh, we just went through that the other day. And I really hate that, by the way. I have never been a fan of the FCS FBS. I just wish they just would have left it at 1A and 1AA. I don't know why it became important to go to football bowl subdivision and football championship subdivision. And now it's, of course, silly because we do a championship in the football bowl subdivision. So although we do still have bowl games. So, I mean, it's just why that's the moniker or the way that we delineate it, I have no idea. But anyway, there's 134 teams, so Georgia and Mississippi State are actually fairly similar profiles. Mississippi State's averaging a little over 33 points a game. Georgia a little over 32 points a game. Georgia's averaging a little more offensively in terms of yardage, just a shade over 420 yards a game, whereas Mississippi State is right at about 408 yards a game. So right around that 400 mark, I've made this point before, that's kind of the beginning of what you'd say, hey, that's a good offense, depending on the year and how things shape up, because each year the stats are a little bit up or down, a little heavier offense, a little heavier defense, just depends on the year. But right now, 400 yards a game puts you in the upper half of the 134 teams in FCS. Okay, so and Georgia and Mississippi State are both kind of in the upper 40 or 50. Georgia, in terms of yardage, is like 42. State's down in the 50s, but in terms of points, State's up like at 37 and Georgia's in the 50s in terms of, or 40s in terms of points. So they're both, in that upper third of offensive output when you look at points and yardage coming into the season. The big difference between these two teams is defense. Georgia is, despite all of the consternation, and this is kind of a point I keep making, shockingly, and despite all the consternation we've had about our defense and how it feels like this defense is unlike anything we've seen in most of the 10 years of the Kirby Smart era, just seems to be leaky and a defense that can be attacked and is giving up a ton of yards and points. But actually, this defense, I keep making this point, statistically is a little bit better than last year's defense. Now, again, we're coming into our 9th game of the season here, and last year's team, by the time it was all said and done, went 11-3. They played 14 games. So we're coming, we've only played 8 games so far versus 14 games last year. And of course, the longer you go in the season, especially when you make the SEC championship game like we did last year and you make the playoff, well, now you're playing elite teams. And so you're more often going to see your stats affected. I mean, the true nature of college football is a lot of these stats are accumulated. And I've kind of talked about this before, but a lot of these stats are accumulated against your mid-level and lesser teams. When the top teams play each other, and you can think about like this year's Georgia-Alabama game. Statistically, there was very little separation between the Georgia-Alabama teams on the field. And frankly, there's very little separation on the field, right? I keep making this point, but it was a 24-21 game. So neither team got into the 30s, even if they averaged 30 points a game. Neither team was able to hold the other team under 20, which is sort of the beginning of playing a good defensive team, right? If you hold a team to 17 points and you can score, if you average scoring, and right now Georgia is averaging, for instance, about 32.5 points a game and giving up a little under 20, like 19.5 points a game defensively. So Georgia's averaging almost winning games by 2 scores. But So then when you play another team of similar talent, similar capability, good coaching, you see these games often get a lot closer, and both teams are able to do the same thing to each other, which is to remove or lower their floors and their ceilings to where they come, or lower their ceiling and lower the floor. Maybe, I guess the idea is you're pulling it together on the margins, right? So Georgia was held to well under its average of over 30 points a game by Alabama, but Alabama was also held by well under 30 points a game by Georgia. So the score gets down to be 24-21 in a game like that. And you look at the statistics, and Alabama had like 380 or 90 yards in the game, and Georgia had 360 something yards in the game. So neither team was able to get into the 400s, which they average. Neither team held the other team under 300. Neither team was able to hold the other team under 20. Neither team was able to score over 30. So that's, I guess, what I'm trying to say is when these teams play each other that are more even, then the games get compressed into a smaller margin, and you have the statistics, the scores, and everything are a lot closer. And frankly, that's what you see in the NFL. The NFL goal for years, and this is a reasonable comparison, we keep bringing it up as the season goes on, because we're kind of making college football more into the NFL, whether it was intended to be that way or not. We've introduced a playoff system. So now we're not just going by bowl games and bowls, the bowl and pull era, right? We've had the 4-game playoff, but that's nothing like the NFL, where nearly half the teams or the upper third of the teams are going to make the playoff. Well, that's not the case. Again, 134 teams in FCS. Even with a 12-team playoff, clearly it's a very small number at the top that are going to make the playoff. But when you look at what is happening, and I've made this point about charity, when you look at what it used to take to feel comfortable that you were in contention down the stretch of a season for a national championship, it was being, undefeated or one loss, and preferably if you had that loss, it was either early in the season or against a really highly rated team, or both. And nowadays, you can probably get in an SEC team with a really good strength of record and a really good schedule might be able to get into the playoff system now with as a 9-3 team or with 3 losses. We haven't seen that yet. There was a couple teams on the edge last year with 3 losses that didn't make it. South Carolina, Alabama being the teams that were just out that come to mind. But it could happen. We might see it. We might see it this year. We'll just have to see how it shapes up. But anyway, getting back to the point is that the better teams tend to shrink the games from their wider margins. So when you play the lesser teams, you beat them up, you put 500 yards of offense up, you hold them under 300 yards, and you score well over 30 points, and you hold them to 13 or 14, and so that's where your stats go up. But when you play games that are more equally balanced, the games are more equally balanced, they're a little bit more of a coin flip game, and the stats are more together. So anyway, we were talking about the stats and comparing Georgia and Mississippi State. And so the answer is, look, State has a very similar offense to Georgia as far as its production in terms of points and yards. Georgia's a little better in terms of yards, a lot better in terms of time of possession. Georgia's better at running the ball. State is a little bit better at passing the ball, but again, their offensive production in terms of yards is below Georgia, although they've been able to turn that into a few more points so far in the season. The big difference between these teams is defensively, and that's what I was talking about. And I wandered off the topic, but I started down the road of saying, look, we have all this consternation as fans of a team that normally relies on lockdown defense, and it hasn't felt that way, hasn't looked that way on the field this year. And yet, 8 games through the season so far, this Georgia team is actually statistically better defensively than last year's team in terms of points allowed, yardage allowed, and as far as helping control the time of possession. And is doing a little bit better, or is very similar in terms of opponents' third down conversion rate. The offense this year has helped our spread on third down conversion rate. In other words, again, spread, you want to outgain. We've talked a lot about game control, and that's one of the ways I look at these things and break them down to really try to understand what the teams are doing, not just make it always a gut call like, well, I think this will happen, I think that'll happen. What do these teams do? And we're at the point of the season now where, 2/3 of the way through the season, we can start to look at the statistics and feel like there is some meaning here, although you do have to judge them against how did they do against the weaker teams on their schedule and how they do against the better teams on their schedule, because that's what I was getting at. Is there's a lot of noise in college football statistics. By the end of the season, they're pretty meaningful. Early in the season, it's hard to tell because you have small sample size. Now we're 2/3 of the way through the season. We can learn some stuff, but we still want to kind of look at what it is they do, how is it they do, overall in the different scenarios. As a for instance, I've taken a look at it, and I don't have the screen pulled up right in front of me, but I'll get to it hopefully in a minute. But Mississippi State, for instance, while they average over 400 yards a game and over 30 points a game on offense across all contests so far this year, they're 5-4. They've played 9 games. We played 8. When you look at their conference record, they average more like 360, 375 yards of offense as opposed to over 400 when they're playing in the SEC, and they only average scoring about 28 points a game in conference versus non-conference. So, and I've made this point also before. I feel like I say that too often. Maybe I should stop saying it. But I just want to acknowledge that, look, this is an ongoing conversation that goes on throughout the season. We're kind of constantly looking at and talking about where our Bulldogs are and what they do and what they don't, and we're trying to build on these ideas. So one of these ideas I've been talking about is what Georgia does and what they don't do, what we can learn from both the games that have been played, the stats, and the way they play year in and year out. And this Georgia team, much like most of the Kirby's teams, does play its game consistently, right? So one of the things about that is that our offense isn't the kind of offense that tends to explode against weaker teams and put up 600 yards, 650 yards, and 50 points. But then against the lesser teams, just put up 28 points and 380 yards. So our offense tends to put up the same yardage, the same totals, the same points, regardless of whether we're playing a top 10 team, an SEC team, or an out-of-conference team. Meaning that, we talked about this going back in the season, even if you're playing Austin Peay or Marshall. So we beat Marshall 45-7 to start the season. And Austin Peay, again, that game was interrupted by weather. There's all kinds of factors in that. So we'll kind of just leave that out. But those 2 games, there was a lot of frustration that we all had where we thought, why isn't the offense explosive? And early in the season, you look around the country and all the other top teams are putting up these 70-0 scores against their early practice-like games that they play against these weaker opponents to get the season started. Georgia never does that because our offensive game plan and our overall game plan, our complementary football plan, is not designed around just the fact that when we play these other teams, we're just going to, rip off huge yardage and just, be explosive. But then when we play teams that are better, those plays don't work. We try to run the plays that are going to work the same way all the time, regardless of who we're playing against. And that tends to create a steadier output. And as it speaks, Georgia's offensive production is not very different, whether it's in conference or out of conference. In fact, Georgia's actually scoring a few more points per game so far this year in SEC play than they are in regular play, like 36 points a game in SEC play compared to our overall average being about 32.5. Whereas, again, State's production in SEC play drops from being in the mid 33 points a game to more like 28 points a game. Their yardage drops from being over 400 yards a game down into the 360, 370 range. So that should be a little bit telling for us about that. Who is State and how they want to play? So they run a sort of a fast-paced offense. They're not big on time of possession. Tennessee, I was relating to them. Tennessee's spread fast offense happens to be very run-oriented. It looks like State. I don't know a ton about them, but looking at the stats so far, like I said, they have 2 running backs that have nearly 500 yards a game. By comparison, we have one guy who's in the 400s and one guy who's just under 400s. And we have featured the run game. We're one of the better running teams in the country, averaging over 180 yards a game rushing. So State is only averaging, like I said, about 160 yards a game rushing, something in that category. And so they haven't quite been, let's see, what is it? They're averaging 157 yards a game. But they're also, by the way, averaging giving up about 162 yards a game. So a little bit like us last year, they're getting out rushed. And again, we've seen that when you talk about, and that's why I make the comparison to Heupel, you see how those offenses work, the sort of Baylor-style offense that Josh Heupel has modified and that Lebby is sort of connected to as well, those offenses don't hold the ball very long. Heupel has made a point out of making his a very run-oriented version of the offense, and it looks like Lebby has tried to feature the run with two backs at nearly 500 yards, and yet they still are somewhat imbalanced, passing for over 250 yards a game, but running for only just a little over 150 yards a game. So out of their 400 yards a game, they're still getting about 250 in the air and 150 on the ground. Georgia is much more balanced in that regard. We're getting more like 180 yards a game plus rushing and 220, 230 yards a game passing. So we're a little more balanced in that regard by comparison. So we talked a little bit about who Jeff Lebby is and where he's come from, what kind of team and offense he has, where State is, the state of State. So he's a second-year coach, and they seem to be improving. And we've talked about the fact that this is a little bit of what some people might call a trap game, right? Georgia is not prone under Kirby Smart to being a team that looks ahead a lot. So I don't think we're going to sit there and say, oh, the Georgia team didn't think about or didn't pay any attention to the Mississippi State because they got Texas next at home, and that's going to be for all the marbles in the SEC and whatnot. Obviously that's a big game, but one of the things that I think we can take a lot of pride in and that Kirby has demonstrated is that this team doesn't really seem to have while there are letdowns, while they clearly, and especially within games, it looks like our letdowns, I guess you would say, are almost in games. This year, they've seemingly been, according to most people's thinking and what we've seen on the field, the letdown seems to be more like first half versus second half, right? It's not so much game to game. But most of the time, Kirby has done a good job throughout his career of keeping the Dogs on a fairly consistent emotional plane. They go out and they perform at a fairly similar level week to week. They don't get real pumped up having won last week and then they can't concentrate and they don't, we beat our rival. We went to Florida and we won that game and it was a close, exciting game. And now they can't concentrate and they're going to play a crappy game the next game. We really haven't ever seen that happen under Kirby Smart very much. I think one of the only times I've seen the team have a sort of emotional reaction in the game was the 2018 season when we ended up following up our appearance in last play loss in the national championship game at the end of the 2017 season, the second and 26, I hate to bring up again, but when that happened, we came back the next year and we had a really great season, right? But we fell short. We lose in the SEC championship game and we're not a part of the playoff picture. And even though we had a really good team and had competed well all season, so we end up going to, I don't remember if it was I guess it was the Sugar Bowl most likely. And but long story short, we played Texas and we lost to Texas, and it just looked like that was the only time I could really remember thinking that the team came out and just looked like they weren't able to do it, right? They just weren't as interested in being in that bowl game, even though it was a high-profile bowl game against a high-profile team in Texas. They just didn't look very interested. The high of running from trying to rebuild the program to a national championship game appearance, being one play short, coming back the next season and having a really good regular season, only to fall short and not make the playoff, that just seemed to affect them. And they seemed to go into the bowl game a little bit in a sleepwalk. Texas jumped them early. There was a little bit of an effort to come back. At the end, it was like a one-score game, but we lost. And it just looked like an unspirited performance. That's probably the only time I think I can remember in the Kirby Smart era a sense that the season or the previous game or just the situation seemed to dictate what was happening to Georgia on the field. So I'm not expecting a letdown. I'm not concerned that it's an 11 a.m. game local time because, again, for our team, it's a noon game. And we've already performed as about the same on the season playing a noon game at home recently as we do on the road. So none of those things concern me. What does concern me is that State does have some momentum. They may have a little bit of an emotional letdown. They're definitely going to have to, I'm sure they were fired up and excited about finally getting a conference win. I'm sure they're excited about being over 500, 5-4 this late in the season, having a shot at a bowl game. And so I'm sure that they feel some excitement about that. And they're going to have to buckle down and concentrate with a top opponent coming to town. But they also should have a lot of confidence because, again, they gave Florida all they could handle a couple weeks back. They had Texas dead to rights. And I'm sure they know and feel like they let Texas off the hook more than Texas came back and stormed back and won that game. It was more of State failing, I think, than it was Texas winning. And so I'm sure that's going to give them a lot of confidence, knowing that they have played teams tough. But so let's kind of get into that. So that's who Levy is. That's who the state. That's the state of Mississippi State, where they are as a program. You know where we are as a program at this point, so we don't have to get that deep into it. We don't have to review what Kirby Smart and what Georgia's going to want to do. The narrative is already out there about start fast, start slow. And look, really the last two games, I think the whole start fast, start slow thing has been a kind of a non-issue. I mean, against State, the defense struggled in the first, against Ole Miss, the defense struggled in the sense that Ole Miss scored on its first 5 drives, and they scored touchdowns on all 5 drives. But as we've covered, I keep saying State. Ole Miss, I apologize about that. As we've covered before, though, Ole Miss is also a top 10, top 15 offense, and they're a number 6, number 7 team in the country overall, right? So, I mean, there's no sense of looking at Ole Miss and saying, yeah, they're number 6 in the playoff poll, as we talked about. So they're in an excellent position to make the playoff because they're in a place in the rankings where, again, they could have probably absorbed a loss and still make the playoff as an at-large team. So they're probably going to finish no matter what happens. You look at what their record is and where they go, whether they make the playoff or not, they're probably going to finish as a top 15 team this year, and they're going to finish as a top 15 offense. So on a certain level, yes, we want to think that the Georgia defense can take down any offense no matter how good they are. But I don't think there's any shame in saying, look, they came in and they put up yardage and got some points. But overall, like I've talked about before, a little bit surprisingly when you go back and you look at that Ole Miss game, Georgia actually held that offense well under its averages. They didn't, not so much points. They got 35 points because they were very efficient on 5 touchdowns and 5 drives. But when it came to yardage, they were only averaging about 350 yards, and Georgia had over 500 yards of offense in that game. So we outgained them by 160 yards, and so there was some separation. There was some game control there for Georgia, even against, and the defense was a big part of that. And in the end, after giving up 5 straight drives, the defense then came down with 3 straight just shutdown drives, right? 3 and out, 3 and out, and then like a 5 and out, which was a loss, lose the ball on downs, ball goes over on downs, and that ended the game. And so, they didn't start slow, I guess is what I was saying. The offense started fast and was matching Ole Miss, and the only reason we fell behind is because, again, we were settling for field goals while they were getting touchdowns. But we scored on our first 8 drives, they scored on their first 5. So the offense didn't start slow. They started hot, and they were good all throughout the game. And the defense struggled to find a way to stop Ole Miss early, but down the stretch, they clamped down, and they got it done. But I wouldn't say that we started slow. And same thing against Florida. Against Florida, we get the ball first, we march right down the field, and we score. Then we put Florida into a 3 and out, and we get the ball back, and but then we go 3 and out. And that's when the offense, all of a sudden, there's a little bit of a sputter. We have the bad punt. Florida's on our 40. They get 1 play and a touchdown. And, ultimately, we end up down 10-7 in the first half against Florida, but then we tie that game up at halftime. So we go to halftime tied, and that game is a back and forth game. Then we take control. Looks like we're finally going to assert ourselves. We got the game tied at the halftime. Then they get the ball first, and then we come out, stuff them, and get the ball, go down, take a 17-10 lead, and you're starting to feel like, okay, here it comes. Georgia's going to pull away in the second half. To Florida's credit, and a little bit to our discredit, we weren't able to do that. And it was less, again, about hot starts or slow starts. It was more about, look, Florida was a very good defensive team, and to their credit, they played hard. And to our discredit, our offense, which had, and I had said, I thought the offense would continue to grind, get 400 yards, 30-something points. Against Florida, I predicted we'd win 31-17. We won 24-20. We could have had the 31 because, again, Gunner takes the knee at the 1. So we did everything offensively but score that final touchdown. So the offense, when they did get the drives going, they were very good. They marched through Florida. But the rest of the time, they stalled out. So that's going to be the question in today's game. So when we come into these games, again, our predictive model is to talk about who the coaches are, talk about the teams, where they are. We've done that now. And then we kind of look at the matchups. So the first thing is to go through the three key matchups: the Georgia offense versus the Mississippi State defense. Mississippi State defense is not very good. They're not terrible. They're kind of lower, just below the midpoint of FBS, those 134 teams. They're like 60, 70 in points allowed and yards allowed. They're giving up 300 and almost 370 yards a game. Okay. But again, in SEC play, they're a little unbalanced. They're giving up more like 450 yards a game in SEC play. And really the only team that's any good that they played this year that they've held under 400 yards is Arizona State. I mentioned earlier, and I didn't quite finish my point. They played Arizona State, last year's Big 12 champion. And at that time, Arizona State was ranked 12th. Now, Arizona State is unranked now, but they have 3 losses on the season, but they're 6-3. They're still a decent team, and State beat them. And State beat them early in the season while they still had their quarterbacks. Arizona State now is suffering through quarterback attrition from injury. So, nonetheless, so State has beaten a good team in Arizona State. They have not beaten any good SEC teams. They've lost to the better SEC teams, and not even the betters, the Floridas, but they had Florida. They only lost to Florida by 2, 23-21. So, but again, in SEC play, they're not getting to 400 yards, and they're not averaging 30 points a game. It's more like 670 and 365, 670, 370. Just totally reverse that. Just flip the numbers around. Anyway, 365 yards a game, about 28 points. And defensively, they're giving up close to 30 or more points a game and over 450 yards a game when they play SEC games. So I don't think there's any reason when you look at that matchup to think that Georgia won't get back on track. The offense, and this is where I was trying to go before, I guess. Look, our offense has started well in each of the last couple games. One of the things that hurt us against Alabama, hurt us against Tennessee, hurt us against Auburn, is that not only were those teams able to cut through us defensively, and they were able to get scores and yards early in the game before we adjusted and clamped down and were able to play a much tighter game in the second half defensively. The other part that really hurt us was that in those games we offensively started off a little slow. Now, Tennessee, we scored on the first drive, but then we missed a drive or two. Tennessee gets to a 21-7 lead. Alabama, we really did nothing initially. Alabama gets 2 drives. We go 3 and out in between 2 long Alabama touchdown drives, and it feels like they just owned most of the first half, though they only got up to a 14-0 lead. Auburn, same thing. Auburn did completely own us until the fumble. And then from the moment of the fumble, everything changed. We go on to average, put about 300 yards of offense up from the fumble forward. We end up putting up 20 points. They end up not scoring again, and we end up winning by double digits in that game. So it was a totally different game. But since then, again, these last 2 games, especially Ole Miss and Florida, the offense scored on their first drives, and the offense scored all throughout the Ole Miss game. And against the Florida game, the offense was either good or bad. I mean, they either, we talked about this in the the breakdown of the Florida game, that when the offense scored, they scored on 4 of 12 drives. It could have been 5 because we took the knee at the 1, so we could have had 30 points and 5. But they failed. They didn't quite get to 400 yards of offense in the game against Florida. But they, and part of that was because when they scored, they had touchdown drives where they were like 74, 75, 82 yards. And of those 4 scoring drives, 3 of them were touchdowns and 1 field goal. And that's about the right ratio. Look, it's great if you can score a touchdown on every drive like Ole Miss did against us, but that's usually not typical. But what you don't want to do is if you score however many times in the game you score, you don't want half or more of those scores to be field goals. That's not very efficient. So, 3 to 1 is about right. I mean, I'm very comfortable with our offensive performance. If whatever amount we score, however many times we score on drives, if we score 3 touchdowns to 1 field goal out of every 4 scoring opportunities, then I feel like we're doing our job well. And we did that against Florida. The problem is we just didn't score on the other drives. And the other drives, we were also particularly terrible. We went 3 and out multiple times and then punted from deep in our own territory. And we also didn't do a great job in the return game. And we kind of just kept being pinned on our side of the field, going 3 and out, and then giving Florida short fields. And that really gave Florida a chance to make that game closer. than it probably would have been. And that's really the first time this year we've done that. It really wasn't a very clean or a very good game. I've gone back and looked at it a couple times, and we were either good or not good. We made more mistakes. We had some false starts. We had the turnover early that gave them possession on our side of the field. We had a punt like we've never seen from Thorson, gives them the ball, obviously in striking distance, because the next play they score a 40-yard touchdown. So that's one of the things we have to clean up today, is that against State, they're good enough offensively that they could make the game difficult. They could make it to where we have to score on every possession, especially if we help them. They could do that on their own. Their offense is good enough to put up 400 yards and 30-something points, meaning we would have to match them, meaning that we would have to score as often as possible to pull out a sort of a shootout win. And we could do that, and State could push us into that game, especially on the road. But we could also, the most dangerous thing about playing State would be if we played like we did against Florida, and State probably could take more advantage. Florida's offense is not very good. They are bottom third of the SEC, bottom third of the country in yards and points. State is not. State's upper third. So if we make the same kind of mistakes against State, where we give them short fields, we give them turnovers, we give them 3 and outs where we punt and they have a short field or an advantage where they could quickly get into scoring position, they have that kind of fast-paced, capable offense that can attack our defense and get those scores. So we need to not do that today. So let's go down to breaking down. Again, we got the matchups. The 3 true matchups are our offense versus their defense, our defense versus their offense, and then special teams and coaching. So again, let's wrap that up and say, what do I think our offense will do? I don't think their defense has stopped anybody. They've not been good in SEC play. So there's no reason to think that our offense won't get back on track, avoid the mistakes. I think we have to give some of the mistakes and the problems that happened in the Florida game, we have to give Florida some credit for that and say Florida did a good job, and they're a really good defensive team. And they've got strong defensive talent. They played great in the front 7. They put a lot of pressure on us, and they choked down our run game, especially. We still outgained them, and the winning touchdown came on the big run from Chauncey Bowens. But up to that point, the run game had been pretty quiet. So I think that I don't think State gives up a lot. State gives up more running than they get. I think that they're going to be vulnerable to the run, so I think we're going to get back to running the ball. I think we'll do a good job of protecting the ball. Even with the 1 turnover last week, we're still doing a good job protecting the ball. And I think that generally speaking, State does rush the passer better than we do. They have about 18 sacks and we have like 8 or 9, but they're still not, 18 is not, 20s. At this point in the season, teams that are, high level pass rush teams are well into the 20s. So they can rush the passer, but even if they have, again, it hasn't helped them, and especially in SEC games. So I think we'll see our offense get back to what our offense does. Run the ball, pass, run, pass, nice combination, good balance. I expect us to generate over 400 yards of offense, and I expect us to generate over 30 points in this game. So I think our offense wins the offense-defense matchup against our offense versus their defense. Then you have their offense versus our defense. This is more of the wild card, because I guess the point I keep making is, look, our defense is better statistically than you'd think. We're like 19th in the country in points allowed, in the top 30 in yardage. I mean, we're only giving up 309 yards a game. So overall, the defense is doing better than we might think. It feels like we're just not getting it done. I think that's one of the things that it just, because of what we see on the field, and especially because we've fallen behind. Yeah, in terms of yardage, we're 19th in the country in yardage, giving up 300 yards. So we're top 20 in the country in terms of giving up yardage. Now, again, even that is let's be honest, that's a comeback. Now, last year we were like 330 yards a game. So this year, this team is doing a little better. It's a noticeable percentage better through 8 games than the team was last year through 14 games. And like I said, we still got tough games to play, and that 14 games covered everybody last year. But I think that generally speaking, this defense is doing, and we've talked about this all season too. They have achieved a goal they set out to do, which was to get better against the run. Last year was the first time, not only did we not stay in the upper 10 really, of not just upper 10th but at the upper 10 teams in the country in terms of run yards allowed, but we actually, our run game had fallen so much that we actually got outrushed. We were giving up about 126 yards a game and only running for about 124. So this year we're holding teams to about 90 something yards a game, and we're rushing for about 180. So we're doubling teams up with the run, and that helps with that complementary football and time of possession. State is not going to be able to stop the run. And, so again, and I don't think they're going to be able to run. They do have two running backs that have nearly 500 yards, but they only average 3.9 yards per carry. Something more like 4.5, or 5 would be an example of a really good run game. So, and they don't stay as committed to the run. They are going to pass the ball more often. We have been more vulnerable to good passing attacks. And Shapen, their quarterback, is a good quarterback. He's got 15 touchdowns against 6 interceptions. So he generally protects the ball. He's got over 2,100 yards so far, as by comparison, Gunner's more like in the 1,700 range. So he's putting the ball in the air, and he's not getting a lot of interceptions out of it. So that's good. In fact, they are a +4 turnover team so far on the season. So they generally protect the ball. They don't make a ton of mistakes. They move the ball. But again, they have not had a ton of success against SEC defenses moving the ball. The one thing that caused a little bit of concern, they did get 38 points against Texas, and Texas is one of the top defenses in the country. So, they are capable of doing that. But they also are vulnerable to the sack. And Texas was able, especially late in the game, like I said, they didn't even get off a play on their last play in overtime. Needing to score and being in range where, like what happened to us, 2nd and 26 against Alabama. You could throw a ball in the end zone and tie that thing back up in overtime. Well, they couldn't even get off a pass on the last play. In the last 2 or 3 plays, they didn't even get the pass off. Texas's rush was able to get in there after having been beaten a lot during the game. And that may be a mantra like it's been for us this season too. I am sure that State will get some points, they'll get some plays, they'll get some yards. But the two things our defense has done statistically throughout the season is they continue to stuff the run and force teams to be more one-dimensional, where we haven't had as much luck either creating interceptions or getting pressure on them or stopping the pass game. But what we have done is we're actually one of the better teams in the country at preventing long plays against us. We have not been very dynamic on offense. We're not, last couple of years, we've been in the top 25 or so of long yardage plays. We're not there this year offensively, but we are in the top 20 or so, I think, in the country of preventing long plays against us. And that has been a big benefit from us. So this defense has definitely had a bend but don't break philosophy. It's looked a little too bendy for most of us. We see these teams start early, they get a lot of points, they get a lot of yards early. Then we see our defense clamp down either in the second half or the fourth quarter, if necessary, against Ole Miss. We saw us, again, we had the big stop when we had to have it against Florida. Florida has the 3-point lead. They're driving. They're at the 18-yard line. And rather than kick the field goal, which, again, good choice, I think it would have been meaningless, right? You kick the field goal, you go up by 6. The only thing that would have done for them is it would have prevented them from getting tied on a field goal by us, right? They're up 20-17. So if they kick the field goal, now they're up by 6 points, so we can't tie the game up on a field goal. But if we're able to go down and take the touchdown, we could still win at the end. And that's what we did anyway, right? The net result was we ended up scoring the touchdown. So if they had 23 points on the board, the game still could have ended the way it flowed, 24-23. So I think Billy Gonzalez did the right thing going for the touchdown there. But our defense comes up, stuffs them, gets the fourth down, stop. The offense goes right back the other way. It was a little shaky at first, but another thing I noticed in the rewatch, and just a reminder, Gunner is incredibly clutch. The number of times where a drive that we had to have or we wouldn't have won the game came down to a third down play that Gunner made is a lot more than we might have realized on this season. And I'm really realizing that. And I'm going to make a list of those at some point and go through and talk about them. But of course, you remember the fourth down play against Tennessee. Everybody remembers the fourth down play we didn't get against Alabama. But in that drive that becomes the game-winning score against Florida last week, we end up 3rd and long. We're like 3rd and 8, 3rd and 9. On the first set of possessions, like on the first set of downs, we end up in 3rd and long, deep on our side of the field, because we took over at the 18. And so Gunner hits a pass to Zachariah Branch for about 15 yards, and from there that drive just gets going, right? Like that's how it happens a lot of times. Once you get that first down, then you start moving. That was a huge play. It was Gunner made the play. It was a beautiful pass. There was traffic. Zachariah ran a nice route. Gunner hit him. first down, then the drive gets going, turns into the game-winning drive. So back to the matchup we're talking about right now. Mississippi State defense. I think they'll get some points. I think they'll get some yards. But I think our defense will do what it's done all year, which is stop the run, take the run away from them, make them one-dimensional. And I think we maybe get a little more pressure on them because than we've gotten on people this year because they are susceptible to pressure. They have given up 29 sacks on the season, which is a ton. Again, that would put them in the upper 25 or so of teams. If that was flipped and it was like they had 29 sacks on defense, that would put them as a top sacking team. So you don't want to be top sacked against team, right? So, so I think this is a game, like we lost Jordan Hall right now to the knee injury, and I hate that because he's really shaped up as a big run stopper. But I don't think that's going to be as big a deal in this game because I think the guys that we do have are going to be able to continue to stuff State, and their run has not been able to ever really take over a game and dominate a game. So I think, and we've played teams that have done better against the run than them so far. So I think we'll take away the run. I think we'll make them one-dimensional. I think they'll hit some passes because Shapen is a good quarterback. And like I said, he doesn't make a lot of turnovers. But I think we'll continue to limit the big plays. Now, one other thing I got to tell you, you might recognize when they get to offensively, you're going to recognize their second leading receiver is Anthony Edwards III. And you might remember him Anthony Evans III. He was on Georgia. So this is his first year with State. He transferred. This is a guy we lost. We didn't spend a lot of time thinking about it. He returned some punts from us, and he was sparingly used over 2 seasons. He was a 4-star recruit, like around the number 260, 300 ESPN type recruit as a wide receiver. And he was on the team, and he got a few passes here and there. But not a ton. I mean, you didn't see a lot from him in his time at Georgia. And, to go back and look at it, he was on the team in 2023. He had 4 catches for 35 yards. In 2024, he had 9 catches for 88 yards. So not a big impact player. He did field some punts and kickoff returns. I think he's a guy we would have liked to have kept, but I don't know why he left as far as an NIL deal or playing time. Could have been all the above. But he's having a great year at State, and he's been good against good teams. He's had 100-yard games against Arizona State, Florida, and Arkansas last week. So he's been a big part of their offense. I mean, he scored 4 touchdowns. He's got 653 yards passing on the receiving on the year, 52 catches. All of that would lead Georgia. So you might look at that and see those numbers and think, whoa, hey, we let this guy go and he's now a leading guy at State. I don't know why we let him go. I'm going to guess he's sort of a slightly built fella. And, when you play wide receiver at Georgia, one of the things you really have to do, you should have to do this everywhere. You're going to have to do it in the NFL too. So this is, a lot of people look at it and they say, why don't we get some of these elite wide receivers? Well, a lot of these guys who are elite wide receivers in college don't end up being great guys in the pros because, again, Georgia does run an offense that's more like the pros. If you're going to be a good wide receiver, you got to make some catches, but you got to be able to block. Everybody has to do everything in the pros, and you have to do it at Georgia too. You have to be a solid blocker. And a lot of times the wide receivers are going to get more time blocking than they are catching in the Georgia offense. And that's not sexy. It's not going to get you a lot of notice. It will get you noticed by NFL scouts, but it won't, who know what they're talking about. But it doesn't make headlines and it's not splashy. So we've seen some guys leave Georgia before who weren't necessarily great blockers. I think about Burton, who was one of our leading receivers who left and went to Alabama, right? But he was a good receiver, but he wasn't a great blocker. And I think that's one thing that happened. And he was looking to be a guy who could be more explosive on the field. Evans, I don't know what he wanted. I haven't heard the details, but I'm just guessing, knowing that he's a little bit of a slight built guy, doesn't seem like he was a great blocker. And that's one of the reasons I don't think he got as much playing time. He would have developed over time maybe. But I think he's found a home at State where he doesn't have to block as much, where they expect him to get downfield, make some plays in the passing game, and he's doing that. So you're going to see him out there today, and you're going to notice that he's got some yards, and you're going to hear that he's a former Georgia player. But he was not a big impact player for us, even though he's become a big impact player for State. And again, I don't think that's because we just we didn't know what we had. I just don't think he fit. I think our system required more physicality from the receivers than he was probably able to give it, at least at that point in his career. Other guys who are not huge guys who got more. Arian Smith playing for us, who had a great year last year. He became a featured receiver by last year. He was a smaller guy and was not physical and not a big blocker, and he was mostly just used for speed routes and long passes. And again, you think about the 80-yard touchdown against Ohio State in the semifinal. That's what he was for a lot of his career. Last year, he became sort of the leading every down receiver. He's actually playing a lot of the same role Zachariah Branch is playing for us now. And he developed physically, and he was out there the coaches trusted him to be out there on the field more often for more plays. So anyway, I think that's a little bit quick side note on Evans and what you'll hear and see about him. But that's what I want you to think about that when you hear or you see he's on the field and they talk about his production. You think, oh, hey, we used to have him. And look, we're good at wide receiver. I hate that we've lost Colby Young, but it was nice to see Noah Thomas did have the terrible deflection that led to that interception that led to Florida getting a field goal. But he also had the touchdown, and he had a really good block on a couple key blocks on some plays. Again, talking about wide receivers blocking. So I think he's coming into his own. London Humphreys, our tight ends. We didn't see our tight ends get a lot of action after having a great game against Ole Miss. We didn't see much from the tight ends last week. And again, I think Florida was so stout up front that the tight ends were having to go back more into a blocking mode and help out on the blocking a lot more than they were available to be pass catchers. So I think this week, I think you might see more from the tight ends today because State is not going to put that kind of pressure on us like Florida did. They don't have the kind of front like Florida did. So I think the defense does well. I think the defense can hold State to 24 points, which doesn't sound great, but State is a upper third offensive team. So I think we can do what I was saying earlier in this podcast, which is I think we can hold them below their points, below their average, below their typical production. And as long as we can gain our typical production on offense and hold them below, then the defense can help do its job to create some separation and create a win. So when it comes to special teams, honestly, I didn't look very far into their special teams. I mean, I think that I'm just going to sort of rely this time on the same thing I say all the time. Look, Thorson is one of the best there is, even though he had the one terrible punt in the beginning of the game and it kind of cost us the touchdown. He was fantastic the rest of the game against Florida. And then Woodring has been spot on. When we need field goals, he's been the guy. He's only missed one in a couple seasons now that was under 50 yards. So I think we can count on him. He was a little off, maybe. I do think the special teams was actually a little off last week, and I think that I would imagine Kirby was upset about it, and I bet they had some emphasis this week in practice. And the places they were off, we didn't get the number of touchbacks we're used to, and we didn't cover the returns like we're used to. They had a few returns, especially they had their running back Baugh, and I say they being Florida, had a 35-yard return. And Florida consistently felt like they could and should return the ball when it was returnable. A lot of teams, the way our team has played, a lot of teams, when there is a returnable kick, you still see them go ahead and just take the touchback. Florida was not, that whether that was by coaching design to say, hey, look, we're going to take every chance to bust a play, or they saw something in the way we're doing our coverage that they felt that they could attack it. They were successful. We did not make them. I have seen teams over the last 10 years of Kirby. I think our team has been very good about when teams have made the mistake of trying to return a kickoff. I mean, when you get a punt, you might as well try, right? Whatever. But when you get a kickoff, you're going to get the ball at the 25, or you can try to return it. I have seen teams make the mistake a bunch against Georgia and against our coverage team where they think they can try to make a play, and they end up getting tackled at the 7. Or the 10 or the 12. And so we have gotten a lot of field position battles just by people making the mistake of trying to do the kick return against us. Well, last week, Florida was able to not be punished and actually gain some on the kick returns. So hopefully we tighten that back up this week. Otherwise, we didn't see big problems. The one bad punt, but that's the odd exception, not the rule. I believe in Thorson. And I believe in Woodring. So I don't see, big issues there. But on the kick return game on our side, we also made some mistakes. I'm a big believer in Zachariah Branch too, and I want to see him bust. I've been saying all season, I think he's going to bust one, right? We're going to get a freebie at some point where we help get a win, or maybe help get some separation because we get a big return. whether it's in the punt or the kickoff. Well, so far that hasn't happened, and actually even worse, last game in particular, we did run some back, and we ourselves didn't get back. I mean, I guess the standard is if you're going to try to run it back, you better at least make the 25-yard line because you were going to get the 25 anyway, right? So, well, that didn't happen last week. We had a couple times where we'd returned it, and we ended up at the 18, 19-yard line. And then we go 3 and out and actually lose some yardage, and so we're punting from the 13, 14, 15. That's what happened against Florida that really unbalanced the game and kept Florida in it, is that the offense, when they were good and they scored. When they weren't good, they went backwards or they gained no yards, and the return team had often put us in a position where we're already at our own 18, right? We're already at a teen. You don't want to be at a teen and then go 3 and out and then punt from there, because that's just giving the other team good field position. So I expect I think that was more the anomaly than the rule. I don't know why that was exactly the case, and I think there were some issues. Both teams were a little less good about getting touchbacks, Florida and Georgia, depending on which way they were going in that game. Don't know what to expect weather-wise at Starkville, but I do expect that whatever happened in our return coverage and our return game for our returns that was not solid, I expect that the coaches noticed it as much as I would have or you might have, and they will address it. And that, again, has been more the anomaly over the last 10 years, over this season, over all seasons. So I expect to see that corrected. So I think at a minimum, the best I could say without knowing a lot about State's special teams is that it's an even matchup. Coaching wise, I obviously think that that Kirby has the edge. He's continuously proved that he can, this team has been I think a tour de force in a way for Kirby, because while it has not been dominant and has not looked like the power team, and we've talked about a lot of reasons why that's true and why we're probably not going to see those kind of power teams stacked with talent, I think you really do have to think that this team has exhibited what was talked about early in the season, which was get back to having an urgency about playing football, an urgency about effort and energy, and just a certain love for going out there playing. This team seems to have a love for each other. They seem to be tight. They seem to believe in each other. You hear people talk about Gunner. I mean, every player that talks about playing with Gunner, whether it's Lucky Lawson or Cash Jones or Nate Frazier, these guys all just, sound like they would walk over fire for Gunner. So I think this team has a unity, and this team has bought into the fire, passion, and energy. This team has bought into the you can't kill us, never say die. This team has done some of the goals that it had, like setting out to be more dominant in the run game and to stop the run. And I think that has been one thing they have done all throughout the season. And so we're just waiting to see the defense just get a little more consistent, be able to make those shutdown plays like they're doing late in the game throughout the game. And I don't know that it'll do it throughout this game, but I think that they have the chance today to make the Mississippi State offense, like our offense was against Florida last week, less consistent. And I think that should result in what should be a win, because I think our offense can win against their defense. I think our defense can win a little against their offense, and I think the special teams will be a wash. So those are the matchups. So what are the true outcomes? We always talk about true outcomes. There's 3 true outcomes in every game, right? Mississippi State could blow us out, we could blow them out, or it could be a 1-2 score game, a close game. And I change the definition week to week on what a close game is based on the game. Like I thought Alabama, truly coin flip, right? This is going to come down to 1 or 2 or 3 points either way, and either team could win it. And that's exactly what happened. It was a 3-point game. We had our chances. Alabama pulled it out. So what's going to happen? What are our outcomes? Can Mississippi State blow us out? Yes, they could. There's a chance, right? They have a powerful offense. They can put points up. They can put points up in a hurry. So if you make mistakes, you go 3 and out, you again give them good field position, you give them a turnover, you do that 2 or 3 times in a row, you have 3 bad drives in a row and you let them score 3 times in a row, you could be down 21-0. And then the trick is for a blowout, and I define a blowout as 3 scores, so 21-0, 17-0, 21-0. Those are the beginning of blowouts, right? Or 17 to 21 point win, that's blowout. 3 scores. Beyond, it could certainly be beyond that. So, but to sustain a blowout, State would have to get up by that and then hold it. And again, I think this team has proved that's not going to happen against hardly anybody. Hasn't happened against better teams than State, so I don't see State doing it. So I would say our chances of being blown out by State are 5-10% tops. So I think that scenario is not a very important one to consider. Georgia blowing out State. We keep waiting for the game that Georgia puts it all together. And I've predicted it a couple times, and it hasn't quite happened yet. This could be. This has every reasonably. I mean, it could look on paper as a trap game, but it also could be the game where the defense just starts to gel. They get good pressure on Chapin because they've had pressure on him all year. We stop the run, and maybe he does throw a pick or two, and the defense gets some stops. Offense just keeps grinding, puts up the yardage and points, and we could win this game 31-17. Which actually would only be a 14-point game. So that would not officially be blowout. So let's say 38-17. That could happen. I think that's in the realm of possibility. And I would say that's 35% chance. So let's give it 5% chance State could blow us out and 35% chance we got. So 40% chance that you have a blowout either way, which leaves a 60% chance that the game's going to be a 1 or 2 score game. And I think that's the close scenario here. I don't think this one's going to be. I don't think it necessarily is going to come down to field goal. Look, Georgia, going back to the ESPN FP Football Power Index, the predictive model they use, Georgia has about an 80% chance of winning this game, 20% chance of losing. That was our same percentage last week against Florida. Also on the line, it's been very similar. Georgia opened as an 8.5-point favorite, went down to 7.5-point midweek, up to a 9.5-point now. So the trend has been moving towards Georgia on the line. I think that's about right. I generally think 10-point win is. I think I think that this could easily be a 1-score game, and yes, State has a chance in a 1-score game, but I would say that Georgia has the 60 to 70% chance to win a 1-2 score game here. And I just kind of going with the line on that, and just the things I said. I think our offense will get 400 and something yards. I think they'll get 30 points. I think our defense can hold them like their SEC average to 28 points or less. I'm thinking 20, 24. So I'm kind of leaning towards the idea that it's like 34-20 maybe. I could see, again, the blowout. It could just tip the scales the other way and become 38-17 or 38-21, something like that. I could see that happening. But I think, and I do think we'll maybe see more. I think the defense is going to start looking a little. I think we're going to come away from this game saying, yeah, we gave up some yards and points, but overall, I think we hold them under 400 yards, and I think we hold them to 20 to 24 points. I think we gain over 400 yards, and we score at least 28, but probably more like 31 to 35 points in this game. So that's what I think happens. I think so. We have the 60-70% chance of winning the close game. So overall, then we have a 35% chance of a blowout. There's 60% I left on the table for the close 1-2 score game, and I think Georgia has a 60, let's call it a 70% chance of winning that scenario, right? So overall, I think Georgia has a 65-70% chance or more of winning this game, 80% like ESPN says. And I think it's probably something in the neighborhood of, like I say, like 31-20, 34-21, something like that. Could stretch out to 38, 38-21, 38-17. Those are all, I think, in play. That's kind of what I feel like on this one. So, and those are our true outcomes. The blowouts, Mississippi State blowout, very little chance of that, I think, just because of the way our team has played. I think they could put up points and get a big lead, but I think we would make the comeback even if we fell short. So that's why you don't have to blow them out. I think it could happen, but thus far it's looked hard for us to have that game where we put it all together, and we'd have to have that game where we put it all together. I think the offense will do their job. The question is, can the defense just shut them down? Could the defense have a shutdown day? That's what it would take to have the blowout win for Georgia. And the close 1-2 score game, I think Georgia, again, I think 10-14 point win is about what we're looking at here for Georgia. Certainly could end up being a 1-score game, and I still think Georgia could pull it out. Obviously, State's dangerous, and I'm giving them credit. I mean, and look, that's how it was last year, right? It was 41-31 was the score at home last year. We were up by 17-18 a couple times. We weren't able to hold that. They just kept scoring. We kept scoring. And that's the worst case scenario I see here today too. They keep scoring and they look dangerous, and the game could be dangerous like a lot of these have looked, but in the end I think we'll keep scoring and we win. So we don't have time to talk about any of the other games going on out there. The biggest game in the playoff setup this week is the BYU Texas Tech, where game day is. That's unbelievably a 7 versus 8 matchup. Most all the other playoff teams, now that we know if the season ended today, these teams would be in the playoff. Most all those teams are in action. Memphis, the group of 5 team we talked about, they lost last night in a Friday night game. So, now they were already ranked 29th if the rankings went that far, and that's where we're going to find the group of 5 participant. So now we'll have to start looking around at those other teams like South Florida and Navy, and I'm not sure who all else is still in that running, but we'll talk about that later. So LSU, Alabama, it's a night game, but hardly anybody cares because of what's happened with LSU. The big game that's probably most interesting to us from an SEC point of view is the what is it? What is it I was thinking about? I'm sorry. I should have had that up. I had my game list out in front of us. Texas A&M, Missouri. So Texas A&M has looked really good, but Missouri is a solid all-around team. They're at home, and so that game's the 3:30 game today, and that game matters to us because we didn't get a chance to talk about it. But SEC championship scenarios right now, we have 1 loss. Ole Miss has 1 loss. Alabama has no SEC losses, and A&M have no SEC losses. If we get to a place where all 4 of us have 1 loss, then we probably, depending on the the most likely scenarios. There's so many scenarios still about how the tiebreakers work. It's going to be hard to meter it out. But the most likely scenario is if you end up with a bunch of 3 teams or more, like let's say with 1 loss, then you can't just compare them head to head because they won't have all played each other, especially if it's Alabama, Georgia, Texas A&M, and Ole Miss. So what is going to actually come down to is like the ranking, the combined record of the opponents that you played is probably, it's like the 4th tiebreaker scenario, but that's the one that seems the most likely that we end up looking at if you have several teams tied, especially if everybody ends up tied at 7-1. 7-1 means we have to win out. We have to beat Texas. We have to beat Mississippi State today. If we do that, we give ourselves a chance, but we don't control our destiny because Alabama and Texas A&M are still undefeated. So if they go undefeated the rest of the way, then they'll play in the SEC championship game. But we're still in a decent position for it. We'll know more about what it looks like after today, and that Texas A&M Missouri game could be one that speaks to it. I don't expect anything big out of the Alabama LSU game. I think Alabama wins. So. Listen, so I think Georgia goes on the road, and in the battle of SEC Bulldogs, Bully is cute, and we love all Bulldogs, but we don't love them enough to let them win. I think we win this game. I think we win by 10 or more points, like I've already said. I think we've covered the matchups and the idea. So let's get ready for this game. Hope you have a great Saturday. It's always another great Saturday when you get to watch Georgia football and college football in general. Get some cool weather coming out there. We're going to have some freezing temperatures in Metro Atlanta this week. So it's going to start feeling like winter, and we're getting towards the end of the season, and we're starting to see how things are shaping up, and we're in a good position. So let's feel good about that. Let's be excited. So enjoy the game, enjoy the day, and go Dogs.